Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, I want to welcome you to this week's Lunchtime Hot Topic, February 1st, 2017. There's a lot going on, not only across the state, but nationally in regards to education. We've seen some changes in timelines already with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. And we're just going to try and keep you updated on the work that we're doing. Just want to kind of make it clear that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is first and foremost, and has been since the 1960s when it was implemented, a civil rights act. And what that means for us in Kansas, it's really about title programs. And there is a requirement that states and school districts continue to provide services to students with disabilities, to students in poverty, to ESL students, even into the areas of food service. When you look locally at the federal dollars you receive, every dollar is tied to a student that is receiving some kind of supports based on risk factors. So our work in Kansas and across the nation still continues to move forward on what we're doing to provide these supports to students. So we will keep you updated as time goes and we learn more. Today's agenda: Julie Ewing will be given an update on our ESOL program and assessments and students. Scott Meyers is going to give another update on the KSDE OVT and really around the outside validation team. The structure that we're really focusing on is how do we help school districts work with their neighbors, with other districts around just that mentoring and that coaching. If I'm a school district and I've got an outside validation team coming and meeting with me, what that really means is I have some colleagues around the state that are going to come and learn from us. What are we doing around the board's vision and outcomes? How are we addressing kindergarten readiness? What are we doing around social-emotional character development? All those things that we're all striving for. They're going to come and learn from you. They're going to coach. They're going to mentor. And our goal is that you are also going out to other districts to learn what they're doing. So Scott Meyers will give another update on where we're at with that. Tate is going to give a couple updates. One is on the equitable services for private schools. That is just a reminder. That is not something that has changed from NCLB to ESSA. How do you work with the private schools in your district, those equitable services? So he's going to give you a quick update on that, as well as the supplement versus supplanting as part of ESSA. So as we move through this, again, just a reminder, thanks to everybody that has been sending us topics, things that they want to learn around on these lunchtime hot topics. Good questions, good answers. That helps us form our agenda from week to week. And again, we can't stress it enough. You know, I think back and I sent something out in the last newsletter. Is it possible for a small group of people to totally change what we know as an educational system? And the answer is yes, it can. Matter of fact, the system that we are more aligned with was set by what was called the Committee of 10 back in the late 1800s, where they designed elementary schools, the structure of middle schools and high schools, even to the point where they suggested the sequence of courses from Algebra 1 to Geometry to Algebra 2, and over a century later, we're still following a lot of that. That was really more of an industrialized model. And I really believe the 10 state board members that we have here in Kansas, after listening to over 2,000 Kansans, said we can do this differently. And they're leading that and in partnering with you and learning from you. I really think that we can provide a quality, rigorous educational opportunity in Kansas for our students that more balances how they're doing academically, as well as how they're doing in those interpersonal, those intrapersonal skills, civic engagement. So we're building this as we go, but I'm proud of our state board and Dr. Watson for leading the direction we're headed, because we truly believe that we can lead the world in the success of each student. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Julie Ewing, and I will be doing a Hot Topics today on ESOL and Title III. ELPA 21 results are now available to view at the KSDE Authenticated Web Applications. This is under AMOS, the Academic Measures of Student Success. This is a screenshot of what it looks like for the web applications. If you don't have an account, you will need to register, and you can click that button, and your principal or district test coordinator should also be able to see this information, so you could visit with them about it. Your superintendent will need to approve your access to this account. If you do have an account already, you're going to go to this web applications and enter your username and password. Once you have logged in, you will see a list of accounts that you have access to. Now your list will look different than mine does, but you should see AMOS, Academic Measures of Student Success. This is where the ELPA 21 results will be found. If you look down my list, you will also see KELPA AMAO. In the past, all test results were found here, but this year we have moved it to AMOS. The Every Student Succeed Act will place more emphasis on the ELPA scores, so we wanted to have them with math and ELA. If you get into your web applications and you see only 2015 results, it's probably because you are in the KELPA AMAO and not in AMOS. There are two reports available in AMOS. One is going to be Proficient 2 years, and the second one is the complete KELPA download. And this is going to give you all of your students that you tested last year with their proficient levels and their performance categories. Let's talk about the first report that you're going to see, and that is the Proficient 2 years. This report is going to give you a list of students that were proficient each of the 2 years. Now you may use this as the district or building level, and if you don't see a student on this report, it's because they were not proficient for 2 years in a row. The second report is the comprehensive scores. It's going to have a proficiency determination, and this is the overall proficiency value. You'll notice that it's changed from the years past. We have 1 not proficient, 2 nearly proficient, and 3 proficient. This is what you're going to look at to see if your students are proficient and would be determined to be exited from services. Also within the scores, we have performance categories for each of the domains and different levels. This information can be used for teachers driving instruction and looking at the different levels for each domain. When you get into AMOS and you are looking at your complete student scores, another very important thing to look at, download, print, is the 2016 ALPA 21 Reports Review Guide. This will give you information on how to look at the scores and explain those to you. This year, the KALPA is going to be administered through the KITE system. So all of your information will be found at the ksassessments.org website. And if you click on, you can see the screen that has the home page for ksassessments.org. If you click on assessments, there's a drop-down box and it will go to KALPA. If you click on that, it will take you to a screen that has all of the information that you will need for KALPA. On the right-hand side, you're going to find interactive demos, examiner's manual, and scoring information. Some things to remember: the testing window is February 1st to March 10th. The scoring window is February 1st to March 30th, and all scores will need to be uploaded by March 30th. And the K1 writing booklets may be downloaded and printed from the educator portal on February 1st. If you have any questions, please see my contact information, email me, or give me a call. And I thank you for letting me share a little bit about KALPA today.
Hello, Kansas. This is Scott Meyers again, this Director of Teacher Licensure and Accreditation. I'm here to talk with you about another aspect of KESA, the outside visitation team. Earlier in the year, I did a little preview of the OVT, but now we're getting closer to the actual trainings, so it's pertinent to start talking with you a little bit more about more of the specifics. As hopefully you're aware, and if not, we're going to cover it right now. What is the outside visitation team? The slide on the screen now gives you a nice definition of it. In a nutshell, it's a group of professionals who come together and help. And people from other systems coming to work with an LEA around their accreditation cycle so as to help them show growth over the 5-year period. I've said this multiple times and I'll continue saying it. I truly believe the only way this stuff sticks long term, and it should because it's high quality the way we're moving forward, is to get this work into the DNA of our communities. And that comes from continual concentrated efforts from the LEA and from the OVT who comes around. I guarantee that in the next 5 years, in the next cycle, people will retire, people will change positions, people will leave districts. So it's just essential that we continually work to make this part of just how life is done in a given system. The OVT definitely plays a part in that goal. There are several benefits for becoming a member of the OVT or using an OVT rather. It creates an arm's length relationship. You know, sometimes we just can't see the forest for the trees because we're just too close to it. Over a 5-year period, this group, this cadre of concerned friends who come to the LEA are able to see the bigger picture and some of the minutia to help provide that perspective, which of course plays straight into fidelity of process. A huge benefit. And if I were still in the field, still sitting in the chair, I would truly very much insist on several of my members, my staff members and administrators serve on OVTs, because it's through this venue that we will have the opportunity to share best practices from one another. If you remember back to the days of Harry Wong, you know, he always talked about going out and seeing other ideas and stealing and borrowing them and bringing them home and using them. This is a great opportunity for that, which of course leads to advocacy and support of the local, the systems that we're sending to people, and then also the profession as a whole. And as we all know, we need to be overtly advocating for our great profession. Who should serve on the OVT is a question that we often get, and I often get that from the standpoint of an individual say, but I've never done something like this. You know, how could I do it? Please don't be worried about it. We will train you. As we speak, there are registration forms being that are disseminated for people to sign up to go to their local service center. We're partnering with our friends from the service centers to provide that training. And the reasons to be involved in this is, once again, we learn from one another. I'll skip to the third bullet. We're gaining exposure from other cultures and being able to bring those good ideas home. And then also, even though it's already made this way where you can pick up professional development credit, we're looking at expanding that just a bit. So maybe doubling or tripling or some multiplier of the points so as to help people along their lines for renewal of their licenses. But that's not the reason to be involved in it. The reason to be involved in it, it's service to the profession, and it also allows us to share information back and forth. Like I said, the number one question I get from practitioners out there, including, my wife is a elementary librarian, and she'd said to me, says, well, Scott, I've never done something like this. I'm not qualified. I'm not ready to do it. And my answer always is, you will be trained. We have a nice training mechanism being built. I already mentioned the service centers. Well, right here now on the screen is the link to go sign up for those different training sessions. On February 20th, we will here at the KSDE be hosting a Trainer of Trainers event where we'll bring in all our friends from around the state, from the service centers, and share with them the materials that have been created or just about finished. We're actually creating a very thorough step-by-step workbook. So an individual just literally turns the page and it says, do this next. It's kind of like putting together a model airplane. And so to the point where it'll say, when you're on site, here are the sorts of questions to ask. So what we need from people is that first bullet there is someone with a passion for education. It's truly not necessary that someone has expertise in the KISA process or any one of the R's. We will help get people up to speed on that to where they feel comfortable. Also, another big part of this is each one of the OVTs, each one of the teams will have a chair, and that chair will receive training that is everything that the team members have plus more, which will be geared toward leadership and helping and working with the team to experience a successful experience for themselves and for the local. So I would strongly encourage every system out there. We have 400 some odd systems who will be seeking accreditation. I think every last one should have 4 to 5 or more people involved in serving on the OVT. I understand completely the pragmatics of substitute teachers and time away from the classroom. And obviously the last thing we want to do is negatively impact any individual classroom. So we don't want people to be out of the classroom too often. And we also know there's cost involved in bringing in substitute teachers. So what we're thinking is we're no more than maybe 2 days a year for the team members to serve. Now the chairs, maybe it grows to 3 or 4 days a year. But when we look at the investment that is on the entire system without and within, I think that's cheaply bought, if you will. I think the benefits far outweigh the expenses. So anyway, the registration link is right here. On February 20th, the training for the trainer or the trainers will take place. And so the actual training of the OVTs will launch and take place in mid-March. As far as the actual training itself is concerned, there's no cost outside of getting there. Like I said earlier, we have a nice workbook that Bill and Kelly and Ann have done, I think, an excellent job of putting together, which truly will walk people through what they need to know step by step as we work through the OVT functioning. And these trainings themselves will take place at the service centers regionally across the state of Kansas. As far as going about developing a systems OVT, the second most frequent question I get wrapped around accreditation, or the new accreditation system, is people will call me up and say, Scott, when will you tell me who is on our OVT? We are not doing that. We will not be assigning people to the various OVTs. It is incumbent upon each system to build their own OVT. And there are a variety of ways of doing this. We've got some possible options on the slide. If you happen to be a KLN network, in the KLN network, or you happen to be utilizing Kansas Multi-Tiered System of Supports, or you might be an advanced ed district, you may choose to use players within that already, in that work that's taking place, as your OVT. You may choose to do that. Or you may choose to do some sort of hybrid system where you combine some of those tiers, those bullets together. And then the fourth bullet is what I've been talking around, and that is the whole training. So when it says the service center model, that are the trainings that are taking place regionally. But the important takeaway here is the final bullet. It's the responsibility of each district to create their own OVT. How we'll actually go about doing that is, after all the people are trained, and right now we have north of 500, almost 600 people signed up to be trained, there will be a laundry list put together regionally, and then you as a system will go in and start making choices. And once again, one of the beauties of the KISA system is we're making it fit the needs of each system. So it's not necessary for you to have the same number of OVT members on your team as it does for your system as for some other district. It may make sense for you to have 3 members on your team, 5 members on your team, maybe 9 members on your team, but there's no set number. We'll work that out given the parameters and the size of your system. The slide on the screen now shows just kind of a makeup of what a team might look like. The idea is we have a variety of different professionals from a variety of different other systems coming together to serve on an OVT. One of the dangers, I'm an educator as well, so it's dangerous for us to see things in print because we think, well, that's the rule, it has to be done that way. Nope, it does not have to. This slide does not mean your system has to have 5 members on your OVT, and they have to come from one teacher, one building leader, one superintendent, and so on. This is just representative of, we want a variety of different types of professionals from a variety of different systems coming together to serve on an OVT. About the only hard and fast rule here is that it would be not allowed for one system to send an entire OVT to another system, and then that system were to send back a different OVT to the sending system. So we're not going to do one hand washes the other approach to this. That negates the idea of bringing in purely objective thinkers and getting different views from a variety of different resources. The next couple slides are the broad strokes of what takes place during the 5-year cycle. Now, granted, not everyone will be coming in year 1. Some people will be ready for year 5, next year. We don't think a lot of people will be, but there will be some. But these next few slides run through all 5 years as if you were coming in the first year, because after you get through your first cycle, everyone will be on year 1 anyway. So what happens in year 1 is on the screen, and a lot of this is done by the team who come and are there to once again get to know about the system and to provide some feedback. So now we're launching into year 2, and it's not that the OVT implements system strategies. The OVT comes in and dialogues about the system strategies that are being considered to be implemented. So the work is done at home, the OVT comes in and provides feedback. A physical thing to do is take a tour. Be there, and like I always say, be able to be in the hallways and smell the kids. Get a feel for the culture, for the ambiance of the system itself, and so that we get to know one another, so that the coaching is not just piecemeal, it's built on a relationship. So as we continue on, you'll see these grow into a depth of relationship. So in year 3, we're doing another site visit. We're continuing with our coaching, and we're basically progress monitoring. And by this time, the system has put into place their approaches, to their growth areas, and so it's logical to see, well, how's it going? So if I were serving on an OVT and I show up in March to XYZ district, my basic dialogue would be, okay, you chose relevance as your focus area, you chose this particular approach to meet it or to impact it, how's that going for you? And we'll just have a conversation about it. As I alluded to earlier, I said earlier rather, in the workbook that's being created, it's those sorts of questions that will lead those dialogues that take place. Then of course you're going into year 4. By this time, it's the second year minimally of the approach is put in place and it's working. And so now we're seeing, well, how's it going? A little bit more so. Last year we saw the needle moving to 2, relatively, let's say. Now we're in year 4, and look at that, the needle's going to level 5. And my question would be, well, why? Why do you think that? Or let's say the needle went back to level 1. I'm not like worried about it so much as I'm concerned. I'm interested. Well, and we start this reflective process of saying, well, what's going on? What's the reason behind the results that we're seeing? Then, of course, we're preparing for the year 5 wrap-up, which, of course, is the accreditation year itself. That's the year where the OVT ultimately submits a report to the KSDE, and which goes to what is being called the ARC. The ARC is a whole nother presentation I will do as we move on through the second semester here, but it's important for you to know it's the ARC that makes the formal final recommendation to the State Board of Education concerning a system's accreditation status. So the ARC will look at the information submitted to them, and then through that a process of deep dive into the data and the report that is submitted, then make a formal recommendation to the State Board of Education saying this system should be accredited, or the system should be conditionally accredited, or the system should not be accredited. And of course, within all that, there's a plethora of information that needs to be provided yet. It's just not the right time yet today. I will be doing a hot topic on the or the workings of the ARC, and we'll be able to flesh all that out at a later time. So as always, do not hesitate to give us a holler if you have any questions about this or any other matter that might relate to TLA. And with that, I bid you a fond adieu.
Yeah, this is Tateman, and I'm the private school ombudsman for the Kansas State Department of Education, and we're going to talk about equitable services for students and teachers in private schools today. We'd also like to let you know that there'll be a webinar put out probably mid to late February. They'll be available to all school districts and private schools. They'll go much more in depth than what we're talking about today. Today's just kind of a general overview of the requirements for public and private schools working together and a few of the basic changes through the Every Student Succeeds Act that we need districts and our private schools to know about. Many things aren't changing when working with our private schools and our title services. And these are some of the basics that we've always had to do when we work with our private schools. The key is to engage in timely and meaningful consultation with private schools. And one of the things here, it also should be ongoing. And we'll look at a chart later on in this PowerPoint that will be a really good example of how things should be going on. It shouldn't be 1 or 2 meetings a year, but how we should talk through email, phone calls, in-person meetings, so we make sure the funds are spent appropriately for the needs of the students and staff in our private schools. The second one here also kind of talks about that we need to provide the students and teachers with an opportunity to participate in activities that are equivalent. And that's kind of where the equitable services come into place. It doesn't mean the same services necessarily as in the public schools, even though it could be if the needs are the same in both the public and private schools. We need to assess, address, and evaluate those needs, because we're not just going to provide the services, we're going to make sure the services we're providing have the positive effect that they're meant to have. And that goes right into the 4th bullet point, meeting the needs of those students and teachers. And then the last part talks about spending an equal amount of funds per student to provide services. And there are some small changes that, depending on the districts and private schools, it could affect the funding. And we'll talk about funding in one of the last sections today. Okay, as you might have picked up in the introduction, I introduced myself as the Ombudsman for the state of Kansas. Technically, this is a new position that came through our new Every Student Succeeds Act. However, in Kansas, a lot of the requirements under the Ombudsman position have already been occurring, and I've been filling that role. So with the new position of Ombudsman, I'm just taking over the official capacity as the Ombudsman at this point and as we go forward from this point. I work with all our schools through the LCP process. If they have questions with private schools, they work with their direct local consolidated plan consultant at KSDE, or they can work with me. Many times if the questions go to the consultant, I do work through the answers. Also, I work with the private schools through the Catholic Archdiocese in some cases, but especially the Kansas Association of Independent and Religious Schools. I work with them with their leadership conference, with their summer conference for teachers, and throughout the year with state activity funds that are provide services for our teachers through Title IIA. So in essence, we don't see a lot of things changing with this requirement. It's just now an official capacity. One of the things you'll also see on some of the slides, or what we have here at the bottom, is the citation. If you want to find where some of these things we're talking about are in the law or in the guidance, we have ESSA sections 1117A3B and 8501A3B. Those are the places in the law that the Ombudsman is mentioned, and we'll talk more about the differences in Title I and Title VIII. And then whenever you see a fax in this N1 through N5 is from the guidance. And if you're interested in finding the guidance, it's a fiscal guidance and services for equitable services for private school students and teachers. And we'll have the link in our resources section of this PowerPoint. So the goal is to make sure we work things out between the school districts and our private schools prior to getting the state involved in any type of dispute. We want to use the state to provide guidance and technical assistance if at all possible, and be able to avoid having disputes, which we'll talk about briefly here, but more in depth in our longer webinar that we'll be providing. But one of the other requirements is that we're also going to continue to monitor and enforce these equitable services requirements. We've always done this in the past through our LCP application process, and also through our Kansas Integrated Accountability System monitoring. So this piece is not new, even though it's specifically mentioned as new in the law. As the Ombudsman, I will work with our SEA staff to provide these protocols. Many of them are already out there. Most of our public school districts won't see any changes in how we're monitoring with the private schools. We'll continue to collect the private consultation forms, which will be updated with some of the changes we'll mention in this webinar, and through the common monitoring process that we've been doing the last 2 years. And then also, I'm the primary contact, like I said before, when there's complaints. So if there's a complaint from a private school about what the public school is doing, or vice versa, and the two groups cannot work things out, they'll come to me with the complaint, and I'll work through the ESEA complaint procedures. We already have these complaint procedures in place, but we're also going to look to see if we need to make any modifications going forward. So the next couple slides are going to talk about the very basics of consultation and how important the consultation is. The consultation is an agreement between private school officials and our LEA staff on how the LEA is going to provide equitable and effective programs for our private school children who are eligible. We look at two different things that makes this most successful. The first one is ongoing communication. If we haven't established a good communication source through the in-person meetings we have, through our phone calls back and forth, having questions, looking at how and what we're going to spend our funds are, it's going to be harder to have success with our equitable services. So with that communication, we also need to develop the relationship. So there's a trusting relationship. People are free to question what's in the best interest of these students based on the needs of the students. It's not what a principal in a building thinks is right. It's not what the district staff thinks are the needs of the students and staff in the private schools. So we've got to develop those relationships. And that's why we highly encourage at least one, if not multiple meetings happen in person between SEA or LEA staff and the private school officials. We know that both sides, our administrators, are very busy, but being able to set that time aside to develop that relationship, understand how things are occurring in the private schools and what their needs are. We've also known in some places where this has been very effective is sometimes the private school meetings and the consultation meetings are held in the private schools so that the LEA staff can see what's happening in the private schools or possibly in the public school. Every meeting does not have to be in person. A lot of the follow-ups could be phone calls or just checking in. We also have some districts that have looked at providing quarterly updates on the expenditures to remind our private schools of how much money's left for services and how that money's planned being spent. Because that's the key is during this communication and building these relationships is planning for the next year. So in August, when our school year starts, there's already a plan in place. We're not coming up with things as the school year goes on or trying to decide in March and April how we're going to get these funds spent for the school year. We should have some plans made up front, and there will be times that adjustments have to be made. And that's why having these positive relationships will help when those adjustments have to happen. So here are some of the things that in ESSA have been expanded when consultation is to occur and things that should be discussed about. When we look at this list, we know many of these things were already happening. So some people might seem a little confused as these aren't new, we've been doing them. And in many cases, that is probably correct. These have all been best practices in the past, but now they are required by law to occur during the consultation. The first one is talking about how the proportionate shares of funds is determined. Many times it's just the amount of funds, and one of the reasons is in many states, it's the school districts that do all the formulas to determine these funds. However, in Kansas, at the SEA level, we put all these formulas in place. The Title I funds are determined through formula that is set up in the LCP application. And for the rest of the programs covered under Title VIII, that we'll talk about those specific programs later on, those we send out by figuring out the formulas at the state level. So we tell districts and private schools what the district level funding is for both the public and private schools, so the district doesn't have to do that. And we'll send out the information to our schools of how those are done through the formulas. The second piece is to talk about whether or not it's going to be LEA staff that provides the services or if it will be a third party, such as a consortium, a possible another government agency. We do not see this used a lot. We do have a couple places in the state where this is used, or typically it's a university that's the third party providing the services. Some places we have school districts, some of our larger districts that pool the funds for equitable services for their entire catchment area. Sometimes that allows for more services to be provided. We also should be talking about the approximate day and time that these services will be provided. We shouldn't be discussing in April or early September when this is going to happen. If we're going to have a teacher part-time in the private school, we really should have that decided before the school year starts so all schedules can be determined and we're not having to adjust schedules too much after the start of the school year. And then the last one, another one where we typically don't see happen a lot but is possible, is whether public schools with consultation with the private schools are going to consolidate their funds to provide the equitable services across all programs. A lot of times we don't see this happening just because the amount of funds many of our schools receive for private school services is very small. Another change when it comes to consultation is on the written affirmation. Currently, we have districts and private schools sign off and send in the written affirmation. One of the things that has to be added will be a checkbox underneath or close to the signature of the private school official. And that checkbox is for the private school official to check that says they do agree that timely and meaningful consultation has not occurred. So basically what we're going to expect is to see that checkbox on all of the sheets that come in. Because if a private school is not willing to check that box, we should be having those discussions and communicating why they don't feel like this has happened and making sure the timely, meaningful consultation has occurred. If that comes to the state without that checked, we will be making phone calls and following up to see how we can assist in making sure timely and meaningful consultation occur. That, like I said, will be close to the signature page. We'll also have the same check boxes for which programs the private schools will be participating in, such as Title I, Title II, Title III, a new program, Title IV, if appropriated. We will go ahead and put it on the form because these original consultations will have to occur before we know if those funds will be appropriated. And then also we have some areas that would also have consultation about migrant and immigrant programs if applicable. I've mentioned Title I and Title VIII a couple times already. These are the places in the law where they are mentioned. The equitable services under Title I are in the Title I section under 1117, and the Title II through Title VIII programs are listed under Title VIII in sections 8501 through 8504, which is under the Title VIII uniform provisions. So what programs are we talking about that are covered under Title VIII? And we have a list of those programs here. Title I Part C, which is more commonly known as the Migrant Program. Title II Part A, supporting effective instruction. Usually we think of that as our professional development and mentoring program. Title III Part A, which is our English Learners Program. Title IV Part A, Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant, is the formula grant that I've mentioned before that we're expecting to have. At this time, we've been told by the Department of Ed that they will not have appropriations until late April, early May at best case, but at the latest we should know what the appropriations are by September 30th if there are appropriations to be given out. At this point, that has not even been confirmed. And then the last program, which we do currently have some districts that are private schools that participate in it, is the Title IV Part B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which those programs are overseen through a competitive grant by Chris Macy here on our Early Childhood Special Education and Title Programs team. I've mentioned the consultation form, and we are currently updating that as we speak. So along with the webinar, the new consultation form should be available online, and information will be sent out on listservs when that is available. Our next slide is a really good slide that we encourage people to really look at and kind of keep as the base for their consultation. This was provided to us from the United States Department of Ed. On the left side, there are the requirements that we've always had for consultation, and on the right side, some of the new ones that are required that I mentioned earlier. A lot of these have been happening, and this just the general information that I talked about at first about timely and meaningful consultation. But one of the things we really like about this is it just shows the calendar year and everything is continuous. It's not that we start and have a discussion in May and then don't do anything until August, because usually we're going to want to have things going on throughout the year with discussions and making updates at all times, because we're going to have questions throughout the year of what might be happening, or if we need to make adjustments for professional development purposes, maybe a professional development activity we've been planning on having a teacher from a private school attends been canceled, or maybe because of a schedule that person can't attend that anymore, or maybe the needs of the district have changed since we first planned things in the spring. We also might have changes with staffing. If a teacher is unable to perform the task and there's having to be some changes, we need to work on that. But throughout the year, anytime updates need to be made to the plan by either the private school or the public school, if we've had those relationships developed, it's going to make things go much smoother. So if we spend the time up front, do a lot of planning, things work out a lot better, and those relationships stay very positive. One of the things we're always asked about at the time of consultation is, how do we know the appropriations for the next year? We typically don't know them, but we have general ideas. Year to year, we typically do not see big changes in our title programs. And like as people start getting ready for our consultations for next year, we always say start the end of February, first part of March, planning for next year. We know in Title I, generally, we're expecting approximately the same. Title II, we know there are big changes. We have sent out some of the potential changes to all districts based on current year because we're losing hold harmless. So there's a big change from the Title II side. But we've sent that out so districts have an idea of whether they're going to lose money or gain money. About 80% of our districts will see a drop in our Title II funds. So it's important to talk during consultation that you do not know exactly how much the funds are, but you do know that your allocation may drop by 50%, so you would expect the private school allocation to drop by about the same. Or you're going to see about an increase of 10%, that's going to be an increase. So you can make those plans, and if adjustments need to happen, we can make those adjustments once we find out the final allocations for our services. This is just a good reminder that the characteristics of services, materials, and equipment must be secular, neutral, non-ideological, and supplemental in nature, and these are not to supplant what the private school would otherwise provide absent the federal education services. So this is again talking about we're supplementing the programs in the private schools. These funds from federal funding is not to replace the funds that private schools already use. These should provide for above and beyond services than what's available now. So now we're going to talk about the obligation of funds. And one new piece with the obligations of funds has made it clear about carryover. And I'm going to read this directly because it came from section 1117 of ESEA. Funds allocated to an LEA for educational services and other benefits to eligible private school children, teachers, and other educational personnel and families must be obligated in the fiscal year for which the funds are received by the LEA. What this is saying is the funds that are to be used for private school services may not be carried over. There's another piece of the law that says only in extraordinary circumstances could that happen. And basically, an extraordinary circumstance would have to be run through the state, through the Ombudsman, myself, and we would determine if that truly is. So this comes back to why planning and developing those relationships is so important, because we don't want to be waiting till April and May to figure out how we're going to be use these funds, because if we cannot get them obligated, the funds will go back to the general Title I for the public schools and potentially could have to be returned to the state and the federal government eventually. So that's why this planning is very important. We want to be able to expend and obligate all our funds during the school year they are supposed to be set for. We're briefly going to talk about the change on proportionate share. We'll go into much more detail on the webinar. In the past, and this is a picture from the LCP application that school districts have to fill out. Public schools, staff that deal with the LCP, this will be very familiar. Some people call it the set-aside page. Some people call it the off the top. in the LCP. It's building allocation step 3. These are set-asides that districts can use. In most districts, typically what we'll see are set-asides for homeless and sometimes indirect cost. This is an example from a larger district, so you'll see more funds. The key to this is what you'll see at the top is you have the amount of Title I funds, then you have all the set-asides, and then you have the total of the set-asides, and then a total distribution amount at the bottom. Previously, the private school proportionate share was based on that total distribution amount at the bottom. So in this case, it would be based on the $1.483 million, or I'm sorry, the $14 million. However, under the new law, it's based on the original amount. So instead of basing the services on the total distribution amount, the proportionate share will be based on the 22 million rather than the 14 million. So private school shares will increase in some of our larger districts. So that means there'll be a little less money for the public school and a little more going to the private school. So when you look at these administration and parent involvement, you ask, well, some of that money may be going to the private school. In the future, any money that was previously set aside for administration and parent involvement would not be put in the set-aside boxes if they're being used for private school services. So when we figure out proportionate shares, some of our larger districts, like I said before, will see a decrease in public funds and an increase in funds to provide services to our LEAs. Districts that do not set aside much money, such as our smaller districts that may just do the homeless set aside, that money will be a negligible amount, possibly only a couple dollars. So that'll be something you'll also have to think about when planning for your title services, especially in our larger districts. So once we have that total amount, this is an example of how that proportionate share will be decided. And this is an example of a school district that has 4 private schools. And obviously we've used really easy numbers to work with to kind of show how this would be figured out. In first column, we have the 4 different school areas in the district. The second column, the amount of public school low-income students, and then the amount of low-income children in private schools in those catchment areas, and then the total number. And when you do that, you see there's 1,350 in the public, 150 in the private that are low income, and the total is 1,500. So the proportionate share would come out that the public school would get 90%, the private school services would generate 10%. And so if you had $1 million, that would be $900,000 for public services, $100,000 for private services. And like I said, through the LCP application, we'll have it set up that this will do this for the school districts. So they'll be able to figure this out for the entire private school share in their catchment area. The other thing we talked about earlier is the complaint process. That's talked about more in section 8501. Regarding the participation for private school and teachers is 45 days. And in addition, the secretary must investigate and resolve an appeal to the SEA's resolution in 90 days. So private schools can dispute to the SEA, and we have 45 days to respond. And then if the private schools don't agree with the SEA, they can go to the United States Department of Ed's Secretary of Education, and they would have 90 days to respond. We've had things like this in place already in Kansas. Typically, we don't ever get official complaints because things are worked out before we get to this point. And that comes back to what we stated earlier about developing those relationships and having good ongoing communication. We've talked about, our website. This is currently what our Title Services for Non-Public Schools website looks like. We're updating a lot of the documents on here. This is also where you'll find the guidance, our webinars when they're ready, and you'll see currently we have the consultation forms. It says for 14-15, but actually those are 15-16, and we'll update within the next month for the 17-18 school year. So those are incorrect right there, and that's why we are doing the updates on top of the new law, just completely updating our web pages. Here are some of the resources we've talked about. The Office of Non-Public Education is the part of the Department of Ed that supports our private schools that are accredited, non-accredited private schools, and our home schools across the United States. They also have a listserv that we encourage our private schools and our public schools that have private schools in their catchment area to join. We have our non-regulatory guidance. And one of the keys here is we have some new guidance through ESSA, but it only discusses some of the items that we deal with. So currently, and this is what we state here, except as amended, the following guidance remains applicable. Title I services to eligible private school children guidance. Most of that is unchanged at this point. They will be updating it in the next year or two. And then our Title IX Part E uniform provisions, Subpart 1 private schools. That is now under Title 8 that I've mentioned throughout this webinar. Much of that guidance is still in effect also. Here's a link also to the key ESSA resources just in general for school districts and private schools. And then the last resource is the actual link to the KSDE non-public title page resource that I just showed you a picture of. So I want to thank you for your time today. And if you have any questions, feel free to email your consultants at the Kansas State Department of Education. Thank you very much. We're now going to do a brief update on the supplement, not supplant, from the Every Student Succeeds Act. Approximately 2 months ago, we did an overview of the possible changes based on the proposed regulations that were put out by the Department of Ed. The Department of Ed was in the process of finalizing those regulations and based on the comments that were submitted. However, on Thursday, January 19th of 2017, Education Secretary King removed those proposed regulations for the supplement, not supplant provision. So at this point, there's nothing outside of what was in the original law for supplement, not supplant in Title I. So at this point, we are not seeing any changes currently for supplement, not supplant. So the same rules for targeted assistance schools continue to apply, and the same rules for school-wide program schools continue to apply. We do expect to see some type of guidance or regulations come out at some point under the new administration, but at this point that has not happened, and we don't expect that anytime in the next few months. So we just want to let people know that the information that was provided a couple months ago is no longer accurate, and we're just going to continue as is how we operated under No Child Left Behind. And again, please make sure you update all your schools on this if you've talked about them. At this point, again, supplement, not supplant changes will not be occurring. And again, I am Tate Tateman, and please feel free to contact me with any questions you may have about title programs and the Every Student Succeeds Act. Thanks.